Finalmente, pessoal, depois de alguns minutos de atraso, pô, tem o Twitter ligado aí. Pera aí, só um pouquinho. Deixa eu parar isso aqui. Senão vai ter coisa. Tá, beleza. Sem wireless. A gente volta. Senão já tô vendo que vai ter gente. Job to F. Vai ter gente fazendo. Tem gente tentando sabotar a palestra. Bom, pessoal, para quem não conhece ainda, Lea Culver vai falar sobre startups, Python e resposta para pergunta e tudo mais. Sem mais delongas, Lea Culver.
Oh, thank you. So, okay.
Algumas introduções a mais aqui. Vai ter essa tradução. Eles vão traduzir para português tudo que ela falar em inglês. No final, eu acho que a gente faz o seguinte: quem tiver perguntas, vem aqui na frente, faz a pergunta em português, eles trocam rádio e a gente troca. Pode ser assim? Beleza. Não falei com vocês, estou perguntando para o nosso tradutor. Lea Culver.
Thank you. So I'm Leah Culver. I'm not sure exactly how the translation is going to work. This is so exciting. I like it. So you have that. Is it on the headphones? Oh, that's really cool. So I'll try and speak slowly, and since you all can hear the translator, if anything's confusing, just maybe hold up your hand. And I guess I can repeat myself more clearly. So thanks for having me at Python Brazil. I'm having a really good time here so far. I've never been to Brazil before. It's actually my first time here. And so far I've been enjoying the Brahma and the beef. It's quite good. So I founded a startup called Pounce. Which was a social networking site for sharing things with your friends. So you could get your friends all together on the site and share funny things like links and photos and, thoughts that you had. And people could comment on them and rate them. And you could send out an event and people could RSVP to your event. And it was really a way that groups of people could sort of get together and discuss things, because at the time, I was finding myself IMing people in order to send links and things, and if they weren't there, they didn't see them, and it was quite inefficient. Plus, I had no way of sending things like photos or files to friends unless via email, and that seemed kind of inefficient. So I founded this company, Pounce, with two of my friends, Kevin Rose and Daniel Burka. And Kevin Rose, as you may know, is the founder of Dig.com, and he's a business person. And Daniel Burka is a designer and worked at Dig as the creative director. He's now at TinySpec working on a game for them. So I'm from San Francisco, California, and I've lived there for about 4 years. I grew up in Minnesota, so not in San Francisco. And right about the time when I moved to San Francisco, I co-founded Pounce. And Pounce was around for about 2 years, and as you may know, it was acquired by Six Apart in December of 2008 and was shut down. So Pounce no longer actually exists, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. And the reason I'm here today is Pounce was built on Python, and specifically the Django framework. How many people use Django? Oh, wow. That's so exciting. I mean, going to a PyCon even 4 or 5 years ago, there would have been maybe 1-2 people raising their hands for Django. How many people like Django? Do you guys like it? I love Django. I think it's awesome. I think it makes, Python is unique in a language in that there's a lot of different web frameworks, but I particularly like Django. I think it's a fun community, and they get most of the ideas about the web right. So I was excited. I actually, prior to doing Pounce, I was a Java developer. How many of you guys studied Java? How many do Java development now? Okay, that's interesting. Do they teach it in university here? Yes, okay. So I learned Java at university and I picked Python. And or when I had the chance to pick my own language, when I was starting to Pounce, I could pick anything I wanted. And I was really lucky because it was, my project, and I started the whole thing. I wrote the first version by myself, but I got to pick. I could choose anything, and I tried Ruby on Rails, and I tried PHP, and a friend of mine suggested Django, and I had done a little bit of Python in college. And Django and Python, specifically Django, that really resonated with me, and I really liked it. So that's, I guess, why I'm here today. But I also picked Python as a language, not just Django, but Python, because I like the philosophy of Python. I really like how easy and simple it is to work with other people on Python. And that's sort of what I'm going to talk about a little bit today. Sort of the Zen, so I titled my talk The Zen of Startups. How many of you guys know about like the Zen of Python, PEP 20? If you want to follow along, I guess, the funny thing is I don't really even need these slides because you can find this by either searching for PEP 20 or by doing import this in Python if you type the line import this. So it's the Easter egg that everybody knows about. But so I thought I do a lot of work with startups these days. I had a startup, I don't anymore. I'm thinking about doing another startup, and I talk with a lot of people in Silicon Valley about their startups. Is anybody here working for a startup or a small company? Just curious. Okay, cool, very neat. How many of you have your own personal projects, things that you work on in your free time that aren't work related? Okay, that's super cool. So this can also apply not just to startups, but I think towards projects and starting successful projects and working with projects and sort of the things I've sort of learned in doing a startup. And I also have a lot of side projects, so I'll mention a few of those. So the Zen of Startups and how the philosophy of Python, the Zen of Python, can be applied to building a product and starting a company or starting a business. And I thought this would be kind of an interesting talk to give because often when I'm discussing startups with people, I refer to the Zen of Python, or I'll say a line from the Zen of Python and not realize it and how much it applies to more than Python. All right, I guess we can start. Oh, we covered this part. Okay, so the first line in the Zen of Python is, beautiful is better than ugly. And this seems a little bit obvious, right? Of course, better looking things are better than ugly things. And I could just sit here and say, oh, you just need to hire a designer. But it's a little more complicated than that. I've found that often the best products are actually well designed as well. How many people here use Tumblr for their blog? You heard of Tumblr? Okay. Or maybe how many people does anybody here have an iPhone? iPhones? Just kind of gauging the audience. I don't know if they're very popular here, but at the time when the iPhone came out, it was pretty revolutionary. I mean, for the US to have these features in a phone was a pretty big deal. But now there's tons of phones that are very powerful, but people still love the iPhone, and part of this is because it looks good. Another example of where things look good and it matters is like when you're picking out a car. I'm still surprised that people care about sort of the color of their car, but that's an important factor in making a decision about a product. So it's kind of interesting how design can actually influence people's decisions in what they use. So if a website is better looking, I think more people are likely to use it. And it's funny because with Pounce we had a really good designer, Daniel. And it was an excellent design, and people still to this day come up and comment about how nice the design was. So I guess the lesson I learned from this was it really helps to have things. I mean, I guess most of you are developers. Anybody here a designer? Just curious, a little bit? Okay. So as a developer, I don't always have the best design, and so it helps to have a designer. All right, we can move on. Explicit is better than implicit. And when I was thinking about startups, I kind of think this relates to sort of having a clear idea of where you're going, what you will build, and who you're working with. And specifically who you're working with and picking a team. I think one of the things that is maybe should have a little bit more emphasis is the fact that when you pick co-founders and people to work with, or you pick people to work with on a project, you're going to be stuck with these people for a while. So I think it's really important to have good communication and sort of be on the same page. And I've heard it said that when you form a startup, your co-founders are like your family. So so having a good sort of discussion and having good relationships with your co-founders is super important. For Pounce, for explicit is better than implicit, we had really clear roles within the company, a designer, a business person, a developer, and it was really obvious sort of what we needed to do. And we had a whiteboard in the office that actually had, I mean, we only had 3 people working on it, and we had a whiteboard that had all our tasks just written out very clearly on it. And that was very, very helpful. Simple is better than complex. And I think of this when I'm picking ideas for projects. I have what I call sort of the minimal feature set, which means what is sort of the minimum amount of features that you can put into a product to make it successful. And this came out of, Pounce was a little bit, I think for a first project it was really complicated, and I wanted to do everything, and I wanted Pounce to do everything because as a developer I wanted to try everything. So I ended up shoving a lot of features into Pounce that maybe weren't necessary and made it sort of confusing for users. So it wasn't just about sending files, but also about sending links or photos, and it was a little bit ambiguous in its purpose, and I regret that a little bit. And I'm working on a new project now with a couple friends, and it's a similar type of app. Like, I'm really interested in social applications and how people interact online, and the latest application I'm working on is group software. So sort of like Facebook groups. Anybody use Facebook groups? A little bit, so like where you can get together with a group online and sort of communicate that way. And the idea was sort of topic-based group chat. So you have a group, and then you can pick topics like you would in a forum. You can list the topic, and then within that topic you can chat about it. So it's actually like live updating chat within that topic, but it's all logged, and it looks like forums if you go to visit. So it's interesting, and when we were discussing this idea, me and the Erics who I work with two guys, they're both named Eric. I'm Eric 3, so, but when we were discussing it, we realized that it could get complex really fast. And so to keep it simple, we said, let's build a prototype and try it out and add features as we need them. And that's been working out really well. And I would suggest that for any project. I think the prototype took 2 days to build. It was just very quick. One of the Erics built it. I didn't even help on the first version. And we built it, and it was quick, and we added features as we need them, and it ended up working out really well because it became really obvious what features we needed. So when we came back to the site and saw that there was activity, we wanted an unread count to see how much activity has occurred since we last visited. So it was more like forums. How much stuff has happened since I've been here? And it was pretty cool. And so some of these features came out of using the app. We didn't have unread counts when we started, instead of coming up with a lot of features up front. So that ended up working out really well. And if you're lucky enough to have a couple friends, we have about 16 people using the site. Not very many, not a very popular app yet, but it's private. We just have our friends using it and trying out. It's been a really, really good way to see, to keep it simple and to sort of know what we really need to add. So complex is better than complicated. So if you can't be simple, you have to do something complex. It's better to be complex than complicated. So I was actually a little bit confused by this terminology. So I looked this up in the dictionary, and complex and complicated pretty much have the same definition. So I was like, what's the difference between complex and complicated? And I think there's a slight nuance between the two words, being that complex is necessary, whereas complicated is difficult for no reason. So I think that's sort of the difference there. So sometimes you're going to have things that you can't simplify, that are difficult things to do that you need to do for your app. For example, I was thinking about this, and I just added to our new project, I added forget password functionality. So how many of you have had to add like a forget password to a site? It's not pretty, right? They have to enter their email address, it sends an email. There's a bunch of different ways to do it, but I think the common way is you have the user enter their email address, it emails them, they get a link to go and change their password. And it's not pretty, and it's not something you think to add to a site right away. And we would all love it if we didn't have to add that to any site. But of course, how many people have forgotten their password? I forget my password all the time. It's super embarrassing. So even in the most technical of sites, people forget their passwords. So it's funny, my friends are all very technical, and I've had sites that did not have forget password in them, because I'm like, oh, nobody will forget their passwords. All my friends are very technical. They're all very good with their passwords. Now, probably in the first day, someone emails me, I forgot my password. Can I reset it? So, but luckily things like this, and this is one of the reasons I like Django, is forget passwords built in. There's a whole, even the views and the HTML for forget passwords all done for you. So it's very easy and nice. So I really like that Django takes the things that are complex and actually, kind of does them for you. So complex, but not complicated. All right, flat is better than nested. Here it's referring to code performance. You don't want to have too many loops and have things get too complicated and too deep, because it affects code performance. But I think this also sort of relates to team performance when you're working with a group and a team. Flat is better than nested. If you have too many layers, too many managers, not enough stuff gets done. And this is something that you learn very quickly when you're doing a startup, is that everyone sort of needs to have their own role and their own job in order to keep things moving forward. It's very different from a large company where you have, a hierarchical tree structure. In a startup, most startups are flat. Most startups, everyone works together. Maybe there's 1 or 2 or 3 founders who are sort of the heads, but there are also cases where if you're doing, say, the iPhone app for the project, or you're doing community management, you need to be your own boss. There are very distinct separate roles that don't have any management at all. So in this case, for startups specifically, flat is better than nested. And for Pounce, just to give an idea, we started off with 3 people. I was a developer, Django developer. Daniel was a designer, Kevin a business person, but we ended up hiring a community manager, and we ended up hiring a second programmer and a sysadmin. So we had I became the front end programmer. We had a back end programmer and a sysadmin. So it was a pretty good distribution of jobs, and it worked out really well for us. So best startups have no managers. Flat is better than nested. Sparse is better than dense. When I'm thinking about startups, and specifically startups in 2010, to me, sparse is better than dense really relates to how it doesn't take much money to start a project these days. You can get fairly cheap hosting, fairly cheap services, and bootstrapping is really an option for startups these days, and it's common. It's not even just an option. You don't need $5 million in VC money or investment to start a company. And some of this is, for example, Pounce used Amazon S3 for our file hosting, which had just come out, I think, the year before Pounce started, so it's brand new. And now Amazon has all sorts of services, EC2 and others, for doing things cheaply. There are all sorts of recurring payment systems built for you that are cheap and easy to use. So I guess what I learned was to take advantage of these resources and sort of see how much stuff I could get for cheap. And for Pounce, we used for our servers, EC2 didn't exist at the time, otherwise we probably would have tried something like that. Google App Engine didn't exist when Pounce started. Things like that you can use now. We used a company called CalPop, and CalPop was located in LA, and if you go to CalPop's website, if you decide to look it up, it's CALPOP. The website is pretty hilarious. It's pretty 90s and pretty bad, but they're a company in LA, and they're cheap and small, and they were cheap. I think our servers cost probably $500 a month for 5 or 6 different servers that we used to run the website, so super, super cheap. And what was great about CalPop is I'm pretty sure that it was a person sitting in a room with a bunch of servers, because every time we'd call CalPop, if there was a problem, we could hear the servers running in the background. So this was not a high-tech shop. And I remember, I think someone asked me the other day, did Pounce ever have any outages? Did you ever have any downtime? And I said, we were really careful to keep the site running fast and to try and stop, code errors before they became a problem. But there was one day, I was woken up at like 7 a.m. on a Saturday, and the site had been down for like half an hour, and it ended up being down for an hour total. And we called CalPop to find out what it was, and CalPop said, your power strip burnt out. Apparently all of our servers were connected to one power strip and it had burnt out. But anyway, so sometimes the cheapest hosting isn't always the best, but it's good for getting your company started. All right. Readability counts. I think this is about having a good first impression for your project and your site. Anybody here work on open source projects? Anybody write documentation for your open source projects? Good for you! So readability in the literal sense, that having good documentation helps a project, help documents for your site or project. But also I think this talks about being like clear and easy to understand. So I do a bunch of side projects, and sometimes I do side projects for programming competitions. Has anybody here ever participated in a programming competition like the Rails Rumble or the Django Dash? Django Dash, maybe? Cool. I think they did a Node.js one this year too, which was pretty exciting. But I've done both the Rails Rumble and the Django Dash, and for the Rails Rumble, they have, at the year that I worked on it, they had open judging. So that meant that anybody in the public could judge the entries, the finished products, and could vote on them. So the Rails Rumble and the Django Dashes, you get together a small team, 2 to 4 people. It sort of depends on the rules of the competition, and you have 48 hours to build a website, and then it gets judged. So the Rails Rumble Django Dash has a panel of judges. The Rails Rumble has open judging. And I ended up building a really technical site with my partner for the Rails Rumble. So it was hurl.it, which is a an API browser, sort of. It's like curl, but as a website. So you can enter a URL and you can see the response and see you can set headers and you can see headers. You can set authorization, and it's really great for testing APIs. So people use it all the time to test APIs, and actually now it's part of the Twitter dev console uses our project Hurl as an inspiration, and it's very similar. But the problem was that the Rails Rumble people said, I don't get it. They weren't necessarily technical people, and it was very confusing. It's like, what is this for? Who needs to put in URLs and hit go? That just seems silly. So readability counts. It's also important to sort of know your audience. And I guess the thing I learned from the Rails Rumble was don't make a technical site for non-technical users. And it's But at the same time, when I entered the Django Dash, my friends entered a site for voting on reality shows, like which reality shows you like the best. Do you guys have reality shows here in Brazil? Yeah, okay. So not really a technical audience, maybe. No? Okay. So the Django Dash is judged by a group of technical people, and the reality one didn't do so well. So knowing your audience is important. I think it also used Facebook login, and everyone hated that. For the technical people, were like, Facebook login, that's ridiculous. But if it had been in the Rails Rumble where anyone could judge, reality shows in Facebook login would have done really, really well. So I think it's really important to know sort of who you're building your site for and to keep that in mind. All right. Special cases aren't special enough to break the rules. I really like this one. I lately have another philosophy. I call this the no settings philosophy. The no settings philosophy means that what we found with Pounce when we were building Pounce is we checked how many people ever changed their settings, like the settings for the website, and we found out that nobody ever changes their settings. No one actually goes into their settings and changes anything. I mean, they'll add their full name, they'll add their profile pic, any profile information, their hometown, things like that. People will change those, but they'll never change, like, do you want to see this in list view or in a table view? Nobody cares. So it's important that when you are building a site to pick the right setting as the default. So it's really important to think about what the default should be, and you can switch that. So I've actually had cases where I've switched the default setting, and I'll talk about that, I guess, in a little bit. But part of that is that people like to have the common experience for the site. It's not only that people are too lazy to go and change their settings, which I'm sure is true, but it's nice to know that when I'm using this site, someone else using it knows the same site. Anybody here use Gmail? Gmail for mail? Okay, good, that's good. I'm getting some more hands now on some of these. But anybody use Gmail Labs and use the new stuff in Gmail? Yeah, Gmail Labs is super cool. So I keep adding these new things from Gmail Labs, and then I go to my friends and I'm like, oh yeah, didn't you see that in the little arrows that show you if this is from a group or not from, not to a group? I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't have that. That's not what Gmail looks like for me. So my Gmail is very different than probably any of your Gmails. And for technical users, that's not a bad thing. But when I'm trying to explain something to someone non-technical or having a discussion about Gmail, it's actually a hindrance. And I get really excited when they graduate things from labs, because then it means that more people will have that same experience as me. Another example of my no settings philosophy is this new site that I'm building, the group site. When you're chatting, we play a message or a sound when a new message comes in. So you play a sound when a new message comes in. And my first reaction to that, like most programmers, is, oh my gosh, people are going to get so annoyed with this sound. We need a way that you can turn it off. We need a setting to turn off that sound. But I stepped back and I said, I'm not going to put in a setting to turn off the sound. I'm not going to put in a setting. There's no settings right now on the site. I'm not going to put in a setting, I'm just going to put in the sound. Of our 16 users, not one person has complained about the sound. They all love it. They're like, the sound is awesome. So it kind of, in a way, it kind of reinforces my feelings that, like, both in keeping things simple until you actually need to add things, and that nobody really cares that much about their settings. I'm sure we'll get a request to change it later, but at the time, when you're building a site and you're building it quickly, when you're building a site for a startup, it's important to keep in mind that we're programmers. We think of every single possible scenario, right? We think of all the edge cases, and somebody will like this, but somebody will hate this, or what if you have a lot of friends, or what if you only have 3 friends? And I think it's hard to sort of rein that in. I have a hard time. I have a very hard time saying, okay, let's deal with the edge cases when we come to them. And that special cases aren't special enough to really change the way I'm building the site. I want to build it for the use case, for myself, and then add extra things as needed. All right, so special cases aren't special enough to break the rules. Although practicality beats purity. So I do sometimes have to add a setting and break the rules. And some settings are necessary. A lot of the settings that I found that we needed to add for Pounce were for performance. So Pounce had a lot of there was a lot of variation in the types of users. So most of the users on Pounce had about 5 or 6 friends, and they would share with their small group of friends and have kind of private discussions with small groups of friends. We also had a large number of people who had over 100 friends. So there was a big gap. There were the people that had 6 friends and the people that had over 100 friends. And there were parts of the site that were optimized for the people with 6 friends. So when you sent a message, you got to say who you were sending it to. So you could send it to your friends, the public, meaning anybody. So you could publicly publish it, you could send it to your friends, or you could pick a friend from a drop-down. So when you had 5 or 6 friends, that drop-down list for picking a friend to send it to made a lot of sense. It was just, pick the friend from the drop-down, it works just fine. But when you had over 100 friends, that didn't really work. Sometimes the page would not even load if you had over 1,000 friends. So this was a case where we had to change the site to accommodate a small group of users. And I think ideally, in the short term, all we did was say, if you had over 100 friends, you had to go to your friend's page. Like I would have to go to your page to send you a message instead of having it in the drop-down. But we left it the same for people with under 100 friends. I think ideally we wanted to change that so that it was the same experience for everyone. But we were in a crunch, right? We had this problem one day, and it was a big deal, and it was slowing down the site. Someone with 1,000 friends, their homepage wouldn't load. It was a big deal. So sometimes you have to sort of break your rules, and practicality won out, and instead of having the site look the same for everyone and work the same for everyone, we said, okay, we'll just say if you have over 100 friends, it's going to be different, it's going to look different, so your homepage will load. So that's my example for practicality beating purity, and I'm sure as you guys have found with your projects that sometimes a quick fix is what you need to get things done. Okay, errors should never pass silently. I think this one's really important. I think it relates to users. So when we had this problem with the drop down and the people with 1,000 friends complaining that their homepage wouldn't load, we needed a way to get that feedback. How did we find this out? I didn't have 1,000 friends. I didn't have 1,000 friends, so I didn't see the problem. I didn't know about it. And it's something maybe we should have tested for, but this is the way startups go. But we started receiving emails, and we had a public forum, actually on a site called Get Satisfaction, which is a public forum, and people could post their problems, and we had someone post this as a problem. And it was pretty easy to communicate with that user and figure out what the problem was. We said, how many friends do you have? What are you doing? And she said, oh, I have this many friends, and it's, so my page is taking forever to load. Is it because I have a lot of friends? And we were like, oh, that makes sense. So it was really nice to have that open communication with our users. And I think this is important for any project, having a mailing list, an email address they can contact, a contact form, IRC, forums, sort of anything that works for your site that helps your set of users communicate with you. And it depends sort of on your audience as well. I mean, IRC works really well for open source projects, but I can't really see, Pounce's users using IRC to contact us. So it made a lot more sense that we had a nice public forum that we could link to from our site. And feedback builds community. If you listen to your users, and I'm sure we all appreciate being listened to, if you listen to your users, they sort of become the best advocates from your site. And when you have a community site, we found it was one of the best ways to sort of build the community is if we helped one person or we took the time to listen to their feedback, they would recommend Pounce to all their friends. They said, oh, the Pounce people are so nice, it's such a nice site, they're able to fix this problem of mine, or they added this feature that I wanted. And it was really a really great way to work with our users. And Get Satisfaction, our forum site, really helped with that as well, because people could add like stars for features that they wanted, so we could even see sort of what features people really wanted. All right, errors should never pass silently unless explicitly silenced. Yay. So you can't do everything your users ask for. It's ridiculous. I think one of the important things about doing a project and a public project where you can receive feedback is to be able to judge that feedback critically. Sometimes you'll get suggestions that just aren't useful. One of the most useless suggestions is, I liked it better the old way. Have you ever added a feature and someone said, oh, I liked it the way it used to be? That's not really helpful feedback, and I think it's part of human nature to like things the way they are and to have them not change. But I think you need to be able to take that sort of criticism with a grain of salt because you built the site and you added that feature for a reason. And it's important to keep in mind that users will always say this, I liked it better the old way, I think there's being able to listen to that and understand why they liked it better the old way, or if it's just, the fact that people don't like change. So I think this is really important to know that, I don't want to say don't listen to users, because obviously listen to your users, but also keep in mind that you are the one building the site, you have the product vision, and you need to be able to make sure that your users aren't overrunning the site with non-helpful feedback. It's kind of mean. All right. In the face of ambiguity, refuse the temptation to guess. So this is interesting. When it comes to building startups, I think this applies to sort of knowing that you have a lot of data and a lot of tools at your disposal to judge what's going on at your site. You not only have user feedback, but there are also lots of other ways to sort of get to have metrics on your site. You can look at your raw data in your database, right? This is probably the simplest way to gather data about what's going on your site. It's just to look at the data. Django has a really beautiful admin browser where you can browse your database right from the website. But there are also other tools you can use. You can just drop down to raw SQL and check out what's going on. There are some other things you can do. You could add tracking. You can add Google Analytics or any sort of analytics. You can add fancy user tracking, like if a user comes from this page, where do they go? These sorts of things. You can test out A/B testing. You can say, if I have the homepage look like this versus like this, how many users will sign up? That's pretty interesting stuff. One thing that I've done a lot is actually take a survey from the users. Now, I know we don't always like taking surveys. I personally never like taking surveys, but some people will give you really good feedback. What I've done, not just sending out surveys for an existing site, but I've had sites where the site hasn't launched yet. For example, I worked on a project called LeafyChat, and if you go to leafychat.com, LeafyChat, you can sign up to receive updates about when the site is going to come out and when it's going to launch. And at this point, it might never launch, so don't get too excited about it. It's kind of a project that I've been working on and off on for about 2 years. And some of the ideas I'm combining into this new groups project, so that may be sort of what comes out instead of LeafyChat. But LeafyChat was originally like an IRC client on the web. And when you sign up to get updates for this project, you can fill out a survey. And it's a really nice way to get people when they're paying attention to your site. You don't have to interrupt them with an email. They're coming to your site, they want to know what's going on. It's a really good way to take advantage of someone interested in the project to ask them what they're interested in. So I've taken that data and sort of looked at, it also helps you build the product. So I've been taking the data that I get from this survey, which asks things like, what chat clients do you use currently? Do you chat with one person? Do you chat in a group? Who do you chat with the most? And very simple questions that really give me a good idea of how people are using chat these days. And I love the survey on the site. I've seen other sites now that do the survey on the sign up, and I love it. I think I took the idea from Daniel Burka, the designer from Pounce. Started working at a company, Tiny Spec, and they have a game called Glitch. And Glitch had it on their sign up form. You put in your email address, and then they asked you a few questions. And I did it and I loved it. I was like, that's a great idea. I want to put surveys on all my landing pages. And Glitch is great because they even do surveys in the game. So they're running beta tests right now where they invite, a couple hundred people to play the game. And then when you're done playing the game and you log off, it asks you 3 or 4 questions about what you thought of the game. And so since you're an alpha tester, I assume if you're an alpha tester, you want to give feedback. You want to help, right? These are my friends that built the site, right? So I want to help. And so I will happily fill out the feedback there. So, in the face of ambiguity, refuse the temptation to guess, and really use I've learned to really sort of try and use every tool available to me to see what users are actually doing, instead of trying to guess what I think they're doing. Okay. There should be one, and preferably only one, obvious way to do it. I love this about Python. This is one of the reasons I chose Python for a programming language. I think it's unique to Python. It's something where if I see code you've written in Python, it looks the same way that I write it, right? All Python code pretty much looks the same, which some people may like and others may not, but I think it's really unique and it's something that I really love. I think it makes it really easy to get started with a project, or to be working on a project with many other people. But when I think about this and try and apply it to startups, I think about when you're deciding on a project or a startup, you need to decide what you do well and to specialize. So having a company specialization. One thing that you do really well. It's a little different from the Python definition, but bear with me and let me go off on a little tangent about this one. But part of appearing easy as a project to users, part of appearing easy as a site, is having sort of a focus in one thing that you do really well. When someone says, I want to go shopping online, they go to Amazon. Amazon's a store. It's really, really simple. For Pounce, our message was send stuff to your friends. And it's a pretty basic idea, send stuff to your friends. And we wanted to really keep a singular goal that whatever we did, it made sharing with your friends easier. So every time we added a new feature, every time we thought about what we were going to do next as a company, it was how do we make it easy to share things with your friends? All right, so there should be one and preferably only one obvious way to do it, although that way may not be obvious at first unless you're Dutch. So I'm going to ignore the Dutch part of this, because I don't really understand entirely, other than that Guido is Dutch, and apparently Guido knows the right way to do everything. I don't know the right way to do everything. I'm maybe in the category of the people where it's not obvious at first. what the right answer is, and that's okay. I think part of doing a project is learning from mistakes and learning from failures. So things aren't always obvious, and you'll make mistakes. I make tons of mistakes, and your ideas will change, and your product will change. It can be big things, like your company can entirely change directions. Could go from selling an operating system to selling a music player, right? That's a pretty big switch in your company. But it can be something small too. For example, Pounce wasn't around for long enough to really have any huge company, what they call pivots. So investors like to call this a pivot, where you go from doing one product to doing something entirely different. I think there's smaller pivots than that. I think there are smaller changes that will happen. For example, Pounce started off very private. So the default option was to send messages only to your friends, and everything you posted was secret and private and just for you and your friends. But what we found when we were doing Pounce, by looking at the data, and sort of a couple months in, we sort of evaluated this and we said, we think people are not just sending things to their friends, they're posting things publicly. And we looked, and sure enough, people were sending more public messages than private ones. And so we had to sort of reevaluate how the site worked and sort of say, okay, let's make public the default option. Let's make it easier for people to see other people's public profiles and their public pages. And let's make it easier to surface sort of general public messages that may be fun to read and browse. And so there was a big effort within the company to sort of switch, to go from being very private to very public. And I think this is a good example of the way the thing that we wanted to be doing wasn't obvious at first, but it became obvious to us later. And I think it's really important when working on a project to sort of be aware of what's going on and be able to change. One of the things I look for now, I'm constantly sort of evaluating how are things going, what are people actually doing on the site, and using those mechanisms for gathering data, whether it's surveys, looking at the database, or doing A/B testing. These are things, really getting that data and being able to change. All right. Now is better than never. This is very inspirational. I love this one. Startups, now is better than never. Your project will change, right? So I take this to mean if you have an idea, you should work on it. If you have an idea for something, it's important to keep in mind that it'll turn out differently than you planned at first. So why not start? Why not start working on it now? And I do a lot of projects in my free time. I've had full-time jobs. Right now I'm a contractor, so I have a little bit more free time. But I have worked full-time jobs before and come home at night to be working on my side project, and it's very fun. And now is better than never. It's always fun to sort of to be able to do that. So another part of this now is better than never is so after Pounce was shut down, and I ended up leaving Six Apart February this year. So I've been contracting since then. But I've been trying to figure out what I want to do next, and if I want to do another startup. People have the assumption that once you do one startup, you're going to always do startups. But I don't know that that's entirely true. My friend Joe Stump, who has a startup, Simple Geo, is the name of his startup. He has a startup, and he tweeted once, it's one of my favorite tweets of all time. Running a startup is the most fun you'll never want to have again. So running a startup it's hard. It's hard work, and it's very emotional, right? When things are good, they're very, very good, and when they're bad, they're really bad. And it's a lot of responsibility and a lot of emotional responsibility. And people ask, what's the difference between doing a startup and working full-time at a company? I've done both. I really think it's about having the responsibility for what you're doing at the company. So when you run a startup, you're responsible for everything. At a large company, if something goes bad, you can just be like, blame it on someone else. You don't have to. But when you run a startup, your users will come to you directly, and they'll say, something's wrong, you're in charge, you need to fix it. So it's very, very intimidating. Anyways, I shouldn't be discouraging people here. Now is better than never. I also have another quote that I liked.